by Koji Suzuki, the sequel to the novel Ring, which was the basis, if you didn't know, for the pretty well regarded horror film The Ring from the early 2000s. Now, a couple of years ago, I think it was, I read Koji Suzuki's Ring, and I quite liked that book. I really did. It was very tonally different from the film. The movie The Ring is like very, very straightforward horror. And while there is an element of horror to the book is predominantly really more of a mystery. But like I say, I quite liked that book. But after I finished reading it, I was like, does this really need a sequel? Like, did this story really demand a sequel? Because if you've read Ring, you'll know that it sort of ends on not a cliffhanger, but it sort of ends on like a dun 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 moment, right, where you can sort of project what's going to happen. And I thought it was a pretty good conclusion. So I was kind of like, does this really need a sequel? But eventually I picked up the sequel, or the first sequel anyway, which is this book, Spiral. And I was a little bit apprehensive going in because I didn't know if it was going to be able to top Ring or really even do justice to Ring. But I have to say, my fears were unfounded because Spiral is a really good book, actually, and one that I have to say I may have just enjoyed a little bit more than Ring. It may actually have topped that book, but I will, as usual, tell you all about it. So, what is the story of Spiral? Well, Spiral picks up like right. Actually, the beginning of this book kind of overlaps a little bit with the ending of Ring. Um, the main character of the book is one Mitsuo Ando, who is a doctor who has lost his young son in a drowning accident and whose marriage has fallen apart because of that. And he is tasked with performing the autopsy of Ryuji Takayama, who, if you've read Ring, is the kind of secondary sidekick character who assists the main character Asakawa, who is the Naomi Watts character in the film version, the journalist who is the main character of Ring. And he died at the end of that book by the Ring curse, right? The cursed videotape. But Ando, the doctor, is tasked with performing the autopsy on him, and he, in a kind of, well, I guess it is a supernatural way, he uncovers a kind of code which he follows, which he cracks, and then kind of follows the clue, and eventually, long story short, ends up unraveling the mystery of the cursed videotape, which was the subject of Ring. He also runs, it kind of makes the acquaintance of a young woman named Mai Takano, who was the kind of the somewhat romantic associate of Ryuji, and who mysteriously goes missing as the book progresses. And then it's revealed that the way that the Ring curse works is through the means of a virus. Now, this is another distinction between the books and the films that have been based upon the books, or at least to some extent anyway, because the first film, at least, the movie The Ring, is very just straight up, straightforward horror. It's just a supernatural curse, right? That's how there's really not much explanation for how the videotape works, except it's a curse, right? But the books take it in a different direction to where it's not really so much a curse as it is a virus, which is caused, as it is revealed, by the mutation of human cells, which is triggered by watching the videotape, which was created by the psychic projections of the deceased Sadako Yamamura, or in the film it's Samara, I think. So it's kind of got this slight science fantasy twist to it, where it has a supernatural bent, but it also tries to lean into like pathology kind of. And so as the book goes on, like I say, the young woman Mai Takano goes missing, and then everybody's like, "Where is she?" And then uh, eventually, it is revealed that Sadako, the evil psychic woman who created the videotape, has reincarnated herself by impregnating Miss Takano via the virus in a kind of convoluted way, and has basically taken a new form, a new human form, and like I say, has reincarnated herself. And then the book ends even more kind of dun 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 than the previous book, with Sadako once more among the living and at large. And Ryuji also resurrected as well. And with Ando, the doctor, being bribed by Sadako to basically just stand down, not to interfere with any of her plans with the resurrection of his own deceased son, because the book gets a little meta at the end. I actually really respected this, with the original story of Ring being published as a novel, just like the actual book was, and then being adapted into a film. And the thing is that all the people that read the book and watch the film, it's revealed, will be infected with the Ring virus, which means that we have the potential for an extinction level event here. That's kind of what is implied is going to happen. Sadako is going to presumably like kill off humanity with this cursed book slash film adaptation, and she bribes Dr. Ando into standing down and not interfering by resurrecting his young son. And so that's how the book ends. This book was wild, because this is a sequel that really was not content to sit back on its laurels and just kind of like ride the coattails of the first book. No, it really set out to one up the first book by taking the story in some pretty unexpected directions. And I gotta say, I appreciate the ambition. I can respect it, because like I say, this book was wild. Let's talk about the technical qualities of it, and then I will like give my grading of it and kind of say why I liked it as much as I did. So the writing in Spiral is pretty much the same as the writing in Ring. It's pretty work. Well, this is a translation, I should start out by saying, so I don't know how much of the effect that the prose has is because of the translation, or if it's actually reads similarly in its original. I don't know, but the English version is very much in line with the way that Ring was written. It's very kind of workmanlike prose, and unfortunately, it relies a lot on info dumping for. Well, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, but the writing is pretty workmanlike. It's not really remarkable for its beauty. It's not bad. I mean, it's not clumsy. It's not inept, but it's not. I can't really commend it all that much, because it's just kind of bland, very bland writing, which tells the story but doesn't really add much flash and dazzle to it. So I mean, it's whatever. But now let's talk about the characters. The characters. This is what I meant. The characters, unfortunately, rely a lot on info dumping. And that was something that I kind of noticed when I read Ring. The characters are they're kind of set up in a very kind of just info dump manner, if you will. It doesn't. It's not very subtle in the way it communicates the information necessary to build up the psychological depth of the characters. It kind of just dumps a bunch of info, and we're meant to run with it. And honestly, the characters are kind of bland. Ando, I mean, he is the protagonist, but I didn't really care all that much, because his personality is just kind of bland. It's just it's just not, there's not much connection here. It's not very gripping. It's not very enthralling. It's just, again, kind of bland. And again, it just relies so much on like info dumping that it just kind of feels a little clunky at times. The characters are not the most complex, even though like you can tell that Suzuki is trying to provide like enough convincing backstory to make these characters like investable, because you know his son died, and like that becomes a major plot aspect at the end of the book, where Sadako bribes him with a second chance with his son if he'll just like stand down and not interfere with her plans to like destroy the human race. Uh, and like I get what he's going for, but it just doesn't land. It's just kind of, again, it's just kind of bland, because there's not much like, he doesn't show very much. That's the thing. He doesn't show a lot of behavior or too much like direct insight into the character's thoughts. It's more just like info dumping. Here's some information. Now let's get on with the story. And it just doesn't really connect all that much. So the characters really aren't that great, I thought, in this book. But now let's talk about the story itself and why I actually did like this quite a bit. Like I say, this book really set out to one up the previous book, and I really didn't know what direction this was going to take, and I did not expect it to take the direction that it did, because it's just so wild. Like you don't expect it to turn into this kind of, like the previous book was a mystery with some elements of horror, and I guess this still is. It's a mystery with elements of horror, but it's more of this kind of like medical thriller revolving around this virus, and ultimately this potentially like doomsday scenario with this virus. And also it just gets meta towards the end, like I said, where the previous book, or like the story that the previous book told, is now being published within this book as a book itself, and then adapted into a film, just like the book Ring was. I really appreciate that, because I'm a sucker for metafiction, and the fact that this book got kind of meta there at the end really won it some points in my estimation. But also, this book is uncommonly thoughtful for a kind of mainstream horror genre fair work. It's got some things on its mind, and that was kind of apparent a little bit in the preceding book. Ring also had some kind of contemplative moments. Uh, Not anything too terribly heavy, but it wasn't afraid to reflect a little bit on like the human condition and like the unknowable nature of, you know, reality and whatnot. And this also has some kind of reflective moments pertaining to like evolution and how things came to be, and whether things are teleological or just completely random. And I appreciated that, because it added a little bit of food for thought in here, which I really admired. But overall, I actually kind of maybe did like Spiral a little bit more than Ring. Uh, you know, it like, did Ring really need a sequel? Maybe not, but I was not displeased with what Spiral actually did with the story, because it took it in some very interesting directions, and it really kind of swung pretty hard, and I like that. So to rate the book, how would I rate this? I think I would have to give Spiral a B plus. The writing is competent but not commendable. The characters, he tried. You can tell that like the author was trying to make these characters have sufficient depth, but the way that the information which is needed to flesh out their psychologies is delivered is not very deft. It's pretty just info dump kind of delivery. It doesn't really connect. The characters I found kind of, well, I didn't really care. Like Ando could have died at any point in the story, and I really wouldn't have cared, because I was more invested in the story itself than I was in the actual characters, and that's kind of a knock against it. So the characters, not terribly good, but the story itself is pretty strong, and it, like I say, it took some very interesting directions, and I really appreciate that. I think I think it's an example of a sequel that actually like is at least on par with the original, if not surpasses it just a little bit. But it's at least on par with Ring in my book, and the ending is pretty. Well, I liked the ending. It was pretty portentous. I'll say the stakes have definitely been raised from the previous book, and I'm honestly kind of wanting to pick up. There's more books in the series, but like originally there was three. There was Ring, Spiral, and Loop. There's kind of a trilogy, and then there's some other books that were written later, which kind of added on. But I'm kind of committed now, or at least hesitantly so, to uh, reading the third book, to read the entire kind of initial trilogy of the story, because I kind of want to see where it goes now. I want to see how he goes about one upping this book, because if this book was kind of much more grand and spectacular in its scope and ambitions than Ring was, and I kind of want to see if he can do that again, if he can duplicate that with Loop, the next book. So I got to say, Spiral, it kind of sucked me in, as a Spiral may be said to do. So I'm gonna give it a B plus. Yeah, B plus. The writing isn't great. The characters also aren't great, but uh, the story hooked me. It kept me engaged, and it's a pretty interesting and well told story. Mostly, at least in terms of its plotting and pacing. So yeah, B plus for me. And now, have you read Spiral? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said. Also, let me know if you've read Ring, or the next book as well. Let me know if you've read Loop, whether I should, what you thought about the film. Again, the pretty well regarded film, if you're a fan or not. And if you haven't read Spiral, well, first you need to read Ring. Actually, I don't know that that's 100% true. You might could read this without reading the preceding book, because there's basically just a big, once again, just a major info dump recap of the events of Ring, which is given within this book. So honestly, you might could actually read this and skip the preceding book, although I wouldn't at all recommend that. But this could be read possibly as a standalone work. But yeah, if you're a fan of the movie, maybe consider picking up the book upon which it was based. And then if you're a fan of that, then maybe consider picking up Spiral, which is the sequel to it. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.